Devices like this allow one to create interfaces in the mind, a psychic lens into information, and extension to more perceptual landscapes. This will get into topics ranging from philosophy to neuroscience to pure speculation. Not so much educational content versus something to change how people see and think about the world. In that way, consider it art, something to make a statement, give pause to think, and perhaps see more of the self and reality differently. The map is not the territory. Instead, the maps are the edges for what we can perceive, conceptualize. What lies beyond those maps, the bounds of the box we put upon ourselves, or are put on us. Humans have always utilized tools to expand their perception of the dark of reality, the unknowns beyond, or overall strove to do so. From the early days of cultivating tools for light, heat, weathering elements, or agriculture, factories and vast networks of information transfer globally. From glasses to hearing aids, cell phones, and more, we make technology and integrate it into ourselves in ways previous generations, centuries past, would think incredible, alien to them. We have always taken new and ever more diverse perspectives, asked more and more questions, shining lights not via physical light, but of inquiry into the spaces of ideas. This, then, reshapes how we might perceive reality, enabling new perspectives ourselves, as well as in turn by making more tools. So, in that vein, how can we better expand our tools, integrate them with our perception, enable ourselves to have new building blocks and patterns mentally? How can we take new lenses not just upon reality, but our internal landscapes as well? We build our maps of meaning, sense-making in the world off of sensory signals initially, patterns of conceptual meaning extracted from those sources. The world seen is not the direct reality itself, but rather a representation from a storm of interplay mentally, from biological to conceptual and back again. Navigation, sight into the world and our mind, in terms of mind's eye, is a tiny fraction of our experiences at any one moment, with insights, inputs, and interactions from structures, systems, cities, and worlds of thought that we only have a tiny window into at any one moment. All the signals intermixing, engrams from memory, updates from sensory signals working together, generating new potential pathways forward, forming the perceptual manifold moment to moment. Devices, such as the ones showcased here, enable humanity to expand their perceptual manifolds, modify and synthesize new ones entirely, by introduction of new patterns encoded into existing sensory modalities, ranging from enhancing spatial awareness to a full 180 degrees behind, to picking up on subtle nuances in infrared, thermal traces left throughout the environment. What we sense, perceive, isn't directly influenced by the modality itself. Instead, the mind constructs, extrapolates meaning from patterns within the sensory signals. Depth perception is generated from bifocal vision, movement through space, and hearing. The sense of wetness comes as a prepackaged symbol sensory side from pressure, texture, and temperature. So, by introducing new patterns encoded into an existing sense, in this case, tactile, a new window opens up mentally, a psychic interface, mediated via technology. Giving a representation, a qualia interface, after a week to month of wearing as though one would glasses, the mind will learn to integrate the patterns and reveal more of the world external. The perspectives gained are not always directly one-to-one from the sense either, but more about what specific information threads are to be woven in. That 180-degree spatial awareness behind, for example, that comes from a thermal sensor, but due to how the mind extracts information, harkening back to depth and wetness, there is more information to glean from these new lenses, even with low-resolution sensors, because of how the mind constructs maps of the world by the place in grid cells. A higher-resolution image appears mentally about the environment. This extends beyond sensory expansion into larger slices of the electromagnetic spectrum, and instead is far more interesting in the conceptual space. What new concepts can be created for abstraction scaffolding to new spaces of ideas? What new applications cognitively can be integrated to reach new areas in reality and mentally? From remote perception to diagnostic information from cars to dynamically generated sensory lattices, what is possible is a matter of perspective. In the way that the mind makes sense to wrangle the shape of concepts and gain insight into new landscapes of thought via language, so also do sensory signals enable new perspectives, without thinking of the constituents comprising them at the forefront mentally. A blind individual can gain some perspective into visual landscapes, enabling descriptive understanding of visual scenes, analogies. This is similar to how language models can understand sighted-based cues and prompts, despite never having seen anything beyond narrative. The structure and patterns cognitively are still perceived off of the information ingested, even if not directly from a sensory modality. We make psychic, as in mind's eye, inner monologue-facing symbols to interact with the lower-level details, and our view of the sensory world external is no different. Most of the energy in the visual cortex is not from the eyes directly, but rather from memory, providing predictive, generative symbols, models to interact with. There is even shared utilization of resources mentally between inner monologue conceptual navigation and perceptual space navigations. Visual, auditory, or otherwise conceptual illusions. Via these, it is simple to highlight the edge cases of our cognition. From inducing false sensations of burning to empathy and pain for a fake hand, the mind readily adapts in what it is expecting to experience and integrates it without caring for the details of how and why. Philosophers as far back as Plato with his cave have contemplated such phenomena, how what we take as the bounds of the box are not bounds but rather edges, lower-level representations, a manifold of perception of higher dimensional information. So, with all that sense-making our biology does in order to create new symbols mentally, how can we hijack that feature to inject new patterns of meaning? Neuroscience from the 60s onward, through the fields of sensory substitution, expansion, and addition, has shown how we can introduce new symbols mentally over existing sensory modalities. Starting with sensory substitution, the taking of a lost or missing sensory modality to then integrate and give some perception of it back to the individual within their manifold. The first test was a dental chair, having an array of pistons so as to poke into the back of someone seated in it. The pistons varied in depth and position, and depending on the feed from a camera, it poked images into the skin of people seated within it. Nowadays, sensory substitution technology is much more portable. Neosensory is a company that makes wristbands that can be had to enable auditory to haptic sensations, decomposing the properties of sound pressure waves into quantized form in order to then convert to another modality, in this case, tactile vibrations. The voice for Android and web can convert visual landscapes in a scanning motion into auditory information, extracting relevant features from the signal in order to condense down in a sound similar to that of a dial-up modem. Over time, individuals can learn this language of that perceptual lens and gain not the same sort of ties people born with those senses have from them, but still utility and ability to integrate the signals into their perceptual manifolds moment to moment. Recent academia is full of other examples of prototype technology to start feeding in more and more information. Seeing with the hands, An electrotactile display used to give individuals a new lens into depth, spatial information not had before. What does blue look like? Wristbands for haptic primary colors can give those without sight a tiny glimpse of that experience. Sensory expansion then allows people increased capacity for lenses into perspectives beyond what the biological could offer. For example, expanding sense of thermal awareness to include feeling of temperatures ordinarily harmful, or being able to pick up on sound frequencies, smells, and otherwise biological signals normally beyond our access. From devices to increase orientation via haptic vests on flight decks, to counteracting Parkinson's shaking via haptic wristbands, technology to expand the existing sensory modalities into new lands is already out in the world. Sensory addition is a true form of what may be possible. Exploring more of the same senses is useful, enabling many, but substitution and expansion are just a tip of the iceberg of potential. Thinking back to wet and depth perception, what else can be encoded as a perspective, sensory signal-wise directly for the mind, not just of a single sense, but of combinations of multiple sensors or other such sources to modulate perspectives via. A small flashlight into the hallways, fractal forests of potential signal combinations to take perceptually. We may only be able to see a small portion at a time within a perceptual manifold, but so much exists beyond what is there with the lights on. From our perspectives, how many different ones could ever be taken, let alone in a lifetime? To encompass what all these do, the term sensory weaving will be helpful, a way to cover the process of what all the fields from neuroscience are doing to present a new psychic interface. So, once one has made a device capable of sensory weaving, how do they start creation, exploration, integration of new lenses? Explaining what these new psychic interfaces feel like when using, may be like explaining sight or hearing to those without those lenses, at least until more scaffolding conceptually is made. When equipped with sensory weaving capable devices, people can navigate to new coordinates within their realms of possible experiences. Until then, the more people exploring, utilizing, and giving reference to this vast universe we find ourselves in will help shine lights into the brains of perceptual manifolds available. Lockpicking is just part of the journey into the oddities that may lie in store. A wild world full of wonderful possibilities, perspectives, and potential, if only open to expanding our manifold beyond the current map. Even if it claims to be all the territory possible, curiosity allows exploration, and sensory weaving allows one to ask novel questions of reality and the self. Like the days of jailbreaking iPhones, we can now sideload cognitive applications and integrate them into our perceptual and conceptual loops. Right to repair already extends to your cars and other products you own, so who would say you couldn't perceive and by extension think however you wanted? What purpose if not for control? Which may not always be for prevention of harm. Harms can come, perhaps, but also what greater harm may come from a consensus perspective of reality mandated for all, with a select few able to take different perspectives and control them for all others. To even propose something immediately gains the Bond villainy level mind control title, not just perceptually in terms of sensory access, but conceptually as well. What concepts may deny questions? What past maps of reality and self holds barriers considered absolute? How deep must a mind be reconfigured in a reality where everyone can have vastly alien perceptual manifolds to oneself? Which, to be fair, humans already shouldn't have been doing this, forcing a model of others onto them versus asking and seeking what was within, and their perspectives. Tools such as these can be used greatly for compassion, understanding, and empathy, connection, creativity, and exploration. However, it also bears the weight of potential weaponization, ostracizing of perceptual diversity, fragmentation, isolation, and decoherence of perspectives, if not careful. With tools able to do this already being out in the world, the real question is, what sort of people are we? Able to have mental connections with the external world in ways never before conceived of. Minds able to take perspectives upon things and pass concepts in ways we can't even think of until stepping through the door to new perspectives ourselves. The utility of such technology determines not anything about the tools, but rather the perspective takers. So what doors will you knock on, perceptually and conceptually? Who and what will you let stand in the way of exploration of this universe?